even though we always said we were a community, was to try to truly live that and bring it as a topic to be discussed at the C level. So with the management team always being the voice of community, but like trying to figure out ways where it could percolate in the other functions. So I think that was my main sort of responsibility as the head of community, was to again bring that to the surface and put it on the agenda. And it took many ways, right?
I want to welcome you back to our series of interviews with chief community officers and heads of community. I'm Todd Nilson with Clocktower Advisors, and we do consulting on a global basis with B2B and mid-sized to large nonprofit organizations to build great community strategies. One of the reasons that I wanted to do this series was to learn a little bit more about that role, that rare and elusive role of the chief community officer or the head of community. How do people end up transitioning or moving into that role? What does that path look like? What are the skills involved, and what's the future of that role? So without further ado, I want to bring in my partner and co-host on this series, my excellent friend Jay Washington and Hugo Paquin, who will get you guys to introduce yourselves in turn. Jay, say a little bit about yourself and your work that you do with Birdie in the Hand.
Thank you so much, Todd, my constant companion when it comes to community. Look at that alliteration. Jay Washington, I am the head of community over at Headspace. I am also the principal consultant for Birdie in the Hand. It is a management consultant company that is focused on creating a more mindful culture and, more importantly, creating a new state of being within organizations for people, leaders, and decision makers. Hugo, I'm passing it to you.
Thank you so much, Jay, and thank you, Todd, for the invitation. I'm really stoked to be your guest today. The Todd father himself, when he calls upon a favor, you can't say no. No, but it's really great to be here. My name is Hugo. I am based in Hamburg, Germany, and I'm currently working as the head of partnerships at VOYAGERS. VOYAGERS is a global community of climate tech and health tech founders and investors. I joined mid of last year, and before that, for over 5 years, I was head of community at Tech Quartier, which is the Frankfurt in Germany, the city's largest innovation hub and startup community. And yeah, I'm really happy to join you today to talk a bit about the journey, but mostly the role itself and its implications.
Well, let's dive right in. As you said, you're based in Germany, and you're currently with Voyagers.io as a head of partnerships. I'm really interested to know a little bit about your journey in community or as a community professional over time. What led you into that head of community role, and how has that led you to where you are today? I think it'll be a great perspective for everybody that's listening in on the interview.
Well, I think the main thing is curiosity. So I'm just someone who likes to try different things. I think, like many other people in the community business, I define myself as a generalist, someone who loves to touch on different angles of relationship building, growth, people-based growth. So, like, just to give a brief snapshot of my career, I started off in Montreal working for large organizations in marketing functions. So I'm a marketer by trade. I studied it. And then at some point after 5 years, I realized, okay, large tech, holdings were not my cup of tea. So I discovered the startup scene. And again, more in marketing and communications, continue following that thread. At some point down the line, I met a German. She became my wife later on, but I essentially moved to Germany 7 years ago. And I was fortunate enough in my first month here, without speaking the language, without knowing anyone on the ground, to find a position at Tech Quartier, which was freshly opened, like just a year into existence. Met the founder at a cocktail hour, and then just said, I'm looking for something, or I think I can bring value to this organization and in marketing. So I basically, it worked out. I became the head of marketing at Tech Quartier. And then that was about 2021. No, sorry, that was like 2019. And then, working at TechQuartier and building up the startup community, which was about 150 founders or so. At some point, there was it became clear to me that there was not someone whose sole focus was managing the relationships with the startup in the community, but also the broader ecosystem. So we had like a lot of corporate sponsors involved, and I was really nagging my bosses with that thing. Like, I'm like, how can we have these partners, but like there's nobody that's like actively caring for them? And the startups, there's event managers, but like, what about the after, and like who makes sure that there's these connections happening? So I think at some point they were kind of sick of hearing me talk about that, and they're like, "Hey, you seem like you know what we should do here, or you have like ideas. How about someone else takes over marketing, and then you can be working on community?" And so that's how I in 2020 or so I became head of community. So that's like 4 years back, and that was my gateway drug, and I've been hooked on community ever since. And so throughout this journey, I joined also the on deck community building, the inaugural fellowship. So I met a lot of other community builders in the space, and I realized like, oh, this is like becoming a fully fledged, movement. And of course, the pandemic hit after, so like the rise of communities in all its glory. And so I figured like I found my niche. Like this is I love still marketing. I still do a lot of that, but it's weaved into my sort of relational aspects of community.
I know, Jay, you've got a question. I just wanted to make a quick remark. I just think that one of the things that I'm really interested in delving into in this interview with you is your perspective of having been in marketing and sort of other disciplines and moved into community, because I think that perspective is incredibly important as we start thinking about those leadership or managerial level kinds of roles. Jay, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt the flow for you, but please go ahead.
No apologies needed. I was just going to make a comment. First of all, Hugo, welcome. But I love your ability to storytell. Like you are dropping gems, the colorful language around the journey of community. I think that's so much a part of what community builders do. And I just wanted to compliment you on it, as well as Todd Father. I was just like, what? What?
Good inside
All right.
joke.
Okay. Okay.
Shout out to Jenny Wiggle for pinning that one to me. So
yeah. Yeah, I mentioned the heyday of community, like pandemic times, but Todd has been at it for over a decade, right? So that's why he's the Todd Father.
I'm feeling like an old man in the space these days. So.
But it was a good point you brought, Todd, about the sort of linkages between marketing and community, right? I think that's what I often do some soul searching. I often have like questioning, especially now that there was a lot of layoffs and community is less, let's say, in vogue, So I think there's a lot of people rebranding themselves, like, or what they bring to the table. And so I'm not sure I want to be the community person anymore. It seems like that's less of a trendy buzzword now. I think it's part of everyone in the field to just like, it's less established, let's say, as a sort of fully fledged profession. So my background in marketing was always kind of my base, my foundation, and turns out it's really synergetic with what you do as a community builder. And when it comes to at the higher level, right, at the C level, I think there's a lot of collaboration that needs to happen between product and community, between marketing and community, between operations, between sales. Having this big picture and being able to understand the sort of the incentives and what drives the other functions, I think that's key, right? So I think that's one of the biggest elements of being a C-level community officer, or just like the top person, that where the buck stop when it comes to community and being the voice of members, is that you're being the voice of your user groups within the C-suite. And you're also, very importantly, you need to develop those synergies with the other departments and the other functions. So, yeah.
You're raising an interesting question around the, is community, was community just something that was in vogue that happened during the pandemic when blockchain and Web3 was kind of taking off, and it was sort of, community almost felt like it was sort of riding along on the coattails of the hype around that space, and now we're sort of in that post-hype space around Web3, and event, been living through these layoffs, which of course have affected many others in the tech industry as well. Is it about that it was sort of a Vogue or a trendy job title previously, or like I also sort of wonder and struggle with something that a chief product officer was talking to me about a couple of weeks ago when I met with her, and she was explaining that she's seen communities in a number of organizations and has felt that a lot of C-suites have a tendency to view any kind of job title with community in it as a tactical and not a strategic solution. I'm kind of wondering how you react to that, and I won't say any more than that because I don't want to bias your reaction to it, but I would really like to hear your thoughts.
Community is in the eye of the beholder, right? And it's depends on if you're talking about a business that has a community strategy or that is community led, or if you're talking about a community and that's trying to build a business on top of it. In that case, I often think the chief community officer is actually just the head of the community itself. Like the CEO would be also the head of community, to my sense. But in terms of businesses, yeah, it's true that it's more you're leading a community-led approach rather than being a community-centric organization. But like if we push it to the max, like I feel like, say, take a company like Amazon, they are well known for their customer obsession. Well, I feel like other communities, other businesses that believe in that, they could also be community obsessed. Like, because being community obsessed is also being kind of customer obsessed and understanding the need of your, customers or members. And that, to my sense, community, it's not like it had its heyday. So to your point about the state of the industry, and I think it was definitely a spike in attention and buzz, but it's not dead, far from it. And I think it was simply a growth spurt, but that a lot of what was laid down as a foundation for us practitioners, I think it will only be there in the future. Like it's like crypto in a sense, right? Like we laid down the rails, and community dates far more than just 2020, to my sense. And I think this will be there. I'm a believer. So you invited a believer on your show. Like I do believe in the future of community as a legitimate business strategy. We can have the conversation about if this should be, in a department, or if community should be a cross-functional, multidisciplinary team that is cross-organization. So I think you'll find all types of figures outside in the business world, but I think we're still experimenting with it.
I find it interesting that we talk about community within the B2B space as this new emerging concept or channel. But for me, community has been an intricate part of the business world since its inception, because culture is built through community. Like your employees and leadership create community that then build the system that allows us to work together succinctly towards a common goal. And so the idea that community is something that has popped on the scene, I've always found that an interesting dynamic. What are your thoughts around that? Is community a part of a successful business, or is it, like marketing, a channel to be leveraged?
That's a great question. I think it can be both. I don't know if that's a fair answer. And so
Yeah.
I do think you could see it as definitely a channel for marketing. And I think in most cases, that's how it is in reality, right? Like I think community often reports to marketing. But I think it's, as we know, it can touch on so many so many other areas of the business in a way that is sometimes not fully embodied by the scope of marketing. I mean, when we talk about product feedback or customer advocacy and that to me are sales, right? Like generating leads and retention, and those are sales elements that I feel it connects to other functions in a way that it's hard to pigeonhole it only within marketing, or God forbid only under social social media, which tends to happen as well. But I think that's the start of any community discussion, is always defining what people understand as community, because again, with buzzwords come misnomers and false labels and just a misunderstanding of what we refer to when we talk about community, right?
I agree. I think for me, the question was more about like, is community in and of itself, community with a capital C, a necessary component within an organization, not as a channel, but as a catalyst to culture? So community, the fundamental base is connection. And I think so often people see community in the business world as a separate and maybe but equal uh, experience. But to me, as a community professional in an organization, it is not just employees and leaders. It is creating this ecosystem and this culture based on something. And for me, that's connection. And whether that's connection to a common goal, a product or service, there is this need for this this element or this thing that creates that connection. And so when we talk about community from a business lens, for me, if you don't have, so inside is outside, if you don't have a created community within your organization, how are you going to create this external channel, whether that be used for marketing, sales, product, if you don't have it inside as an organization, as a key component to your organization? Do you think having community internally is necessary to promote or create community externally to your customers?
I think so. So I'm one of those that traces a line in the sand when it comes to the definition of community. Like I know there's a lot of talk about community everywhere, and I think some might, and myself included, might get confused by like, okay, well, is an audience a community now? Is everything, every channel, every touch point with customer or members a community? Uh, I'm more on the camp of a community by definition is when your members or customers have interactions between each other. So it's not a purely hub and spoke model, but there are interactions between members, and that's what you need to reinforce as a community manager. So I feel like that to me is the start of, okay, this is a community-led approach. And then once you have that, I think you can then think about it in terms of a channel and roll out community tactics and operations to leverage it. But I'm pretty adamant about like sticking to the definition of which is kind of basic, but I feel like to me it helps, like, okay, I can anchor my the rest of my beliefs on that.
I agree. I agree.
I think there's a whole other conversation around community everywhere for us to have.
Stay tuned for episode 2.
Hugo, to what extent was your role as head of community at Tech Courtier a brand new position, and what do you credit with your skill set and experience that made you successful at that role?
Mm-hmm. So it was a new role, so I had to lay down a little bit the blueprint. But again, through the training with On Deck and through talking with others and just sort of keeping abreast of the trends, I kind of was able to frame the role and its responsibilities within like a kind of a strategy. And what my background in marketing helped me with was really, to me, was using what I was seeing on a daily basis, like this relationship management, this feedback I was getting from members, these stories I was hearing. I think of it as a storyteller, as a marketer. So I'm like, okay, hey, we can use this. Like, to give a very concrete example, we had like this yearbook of our Tech Fortier for the year, and the content was user-generated content in many ways, right? Testimonials from the members or cases of collaborations between our startups and larger corporates. And so I had my marketing hat on, and sometimes thinking, oh, like all of this matchmaking we're doing on this side, like let's showcase that and let's put it in this marketing collateral, or let's use it to drive our social, right? Like let's give the voice this other week to this new startup, and then let's give them the ability to tell their story, and just kind of bubbling up the member stories to the foreground was one of the ways that I was kind of using my background as a marketer in a community lens. And then I discovered another thing I really loved was like community operations. So like collecting data about what was happening, trying to, of course, justify the ROI, try to quantify the impact and the value that you bring in the organization. I sort of, the CRM, for instance, like rolled that out, and then, following events, trying to see, okay, what's the conversion like, and how does that help the business? Um, so yeah, these are some examples of how the role took a multi-pronged sort of angle.
I love that point of view around the integrative thinking with marketing and community, the storytelling elements, and I loved how you emphasized, yes, data, but it's also about the stories you're telling and how you're applying the things that you learn in that space with empathy. Might add, I was hearing empathy as a key skill coming out of that. That's great.
And keep in mind that there was someone in charge of marketing, right? So it wasn't trying to do everything by myself, but like knowing what they might look for and just like aligning, right? Like talking, communicating, and saying like, oh, we could do this. I think my main sort of goal was to, even though we always said we were a community, was to try to truly live that and bring it as a topic to be discussed at the C-level. So with the management team always being the voice of community, but like trying to figure out ways where it could percolate in the other functions. So I think that was my main sort of responsibility as the head of community, was to, again, bring that to the surface and put it on the agenda. And it took many ways, right? Like so Tech Quartier was also a co-working space, like a physical 2-floor downtown Frankfurt space with like 100 people working there every day. So our team sat in this section at the reception, but the community sat on the other side. And it happened often that I didn't go on the 3rd floor to grab coffee like in a week, let's say. But there's stuff happening there. There's like every day, different startups, they're hot desking and so on. So, and I felt sometimes like my job was simply to break the silos between the team and and just make sure that the members were heard in a way that, or that people knew who was sitting there and what they're working on. Right. So my job, like, okay, we had the all hands on Tuesdays. So I thought, okay, let's invite every week a different startup to talk to us like 5 minutes about what they're working on, and or just debrief the success stories, like who's raising money, who's hiring within the community, bring that at the all hands as well, and just have like a list of bullet points of what's going on. So my role is simply just being a conveyor belt of information, but just so people kind of breathed and lived like what was happening in this hub. So I felt like my job was simply just I guess shining a light on what was going on.
I love that. I'm going to shift it a little bit. Part of my journey as a community professional has been navigating the nuances of certain communities. Like all communities aren't created equal and they're not homogenized or the same. And I'm curious, as someone who has worked in the international community space, part of my challenge has been learning that I started off doing US-based companies and then moved on to sort of global opportunities with community members from all over the world. As a community leader, how do you prepare others for navigating the nuances of communities within international spaces? There might be obviously language differences and cultural differences. How do you prepare teams for navigating that space with integrity?
Mm-hmm. No, that's a good question. So in my current role as at Voyagers, so it's a global network. We have about 20 hubs across the world. So from Singapore to San Francisco, London is the main hub, I would say. But in 20 cities, there are pockets of or clusters of Voyagers meeting face to face every month or 6 weeks. And so I guess one strategy is again this try to break the silos, and for each hub we have ambassadors that we bring together once a quarter to share best practices and learnings and to onboard new ones and so on. So I think this in a virtual setting, everybody's kind of ready to at least make that investment of once a quarter to learn how to do a better job or how they can make most of the role. So I think setting that up, these forums where people can share and share about their learnings is key. And every hub is still different, right? Like London, definitely different dynamics than Berlin, and especially also with the size of the chapters. So our community, the different hubs are different in size, and so starting off a new chapter in Dublin where is not comparable to the job that's to be done in Paris per se. And so I think being the sort of anchor for everyone within that process, and I think pairing is great as well. Like, so a chapter that's just more advanced, but like not light years away, but like just a few steps ahead that can Sherpa the next chapter lead. So pairing people across geography like this to share best practices is another good way. And yeah, I don't know if that answered your question about cultural diversity, but I would just say that in a global context, for sure you got to pay attention to the sort of local specific. Like a very concrete example is like in some geographies we have an easier time convincing people to pay for dinner before the date of the thing. So, and it's really kind of a necessary thing to do because you don't want to have the host have to pay for the difference or us, So it's a great way to ensure people show up. But like in some cities, it just like people are kind of negative about. I won't name any cities, but yeah, it's not the same everywhere. So these little cultural differences are important to keep in mind, definitely.
That's exactly what I was looking for. Thank you.
Yeah. Hugo, you mentioned using ambassadors at the different hubs. I'm wondering, could you talk a little bit about sort of the structure of the team that you had working under you as head of community when you were there?
Yeah, sure, definitely. So I had, let me think about it. I was working with three people. So I had the one colleague, Sarah, who she was responsible more for the broader ecosystem. So less about the day-to-day community management, but more connecting what we did at Tech Quartier with the city of Frankfurt, the local government as well in the state of Hessen, because there's a lot of startup initiatives in the region, but the stakeholders are very scattered and sometimes misaligned, or to avoid the overlap of everybody's doing their own startup thing, like the government rolled out a sort of master plan and tried to align everything. So she was more responsible for, I would call it government relations and broader ecosystem development. I had someone else who was helping me with just the day-to-day management of community affairs, right? So unsatisfied members, very happy members, new members to be onboarded, community perks. So all the service providers that have perks for startup hubs. So just helping with that, and as well with the marketing. So collecting those stories I mentioned, and crunching the data a little bit to see what kind of KPIs we were hitting, that sort of stuff. And then I had someone else who was managing the relationship with industry partners. So that person, by nature, the role was to be aware of the new startups and technologies we had in the community, to bring it up within the conversations we had with industry partners who were looking towards us as a sort of connection to the startup scene, right? So these large groups, they buy a partnership, but they expect to be fed with insights from the startups, like they have pain points, so any good solutions we should look at. So Tech Quartier was sort of a bridge. So my colleague was responsible for talking to startups to know what they're working on, and then if a partnership or an actual contract with one of these larger groups was possible. So there was a lot of bridge building and a lot of not just sort of navel gazing of our own community and just making sure we're keeping people happy, but it was also to just connect it externally to leverage, for lack of a better word, the community in value creating ways.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question specifically around this area, because so often organizations will hire someone to do community, and there is this belief that one person can do it all. And for someone like you who, sort of developed your own role and then at what point does it become necessary to have a team? I mean, I remember for almost 4 years having to research, develop, launch, manage the day to day, strategize, cross functionally partner with the internal teams. It was exhausting. At what point as a leader do you recognize that there's a need to have more than one person managing this community channel?
Yeah, another tough one. Very organization specific, I would say. But at what point do they invest? So, of course, I think that's also a common thread within community managers, that there's just too much to do for one person. You have to be creative, automate what is automatable, but then still do the things that don't scale and talk to people. But then what do you do when you have 600 or 6,000 people to talk to? So you have to devise some ways that members help you, right? So the community itself is an extension of the community team, in that you have your MVPs and your community heroes that will take some of the burden away, but they're not they're more self-interested than they are interested by your company growing, right? So which still sometimes, Duolingo is a great example. Their community team, even at scale, was less than 10 people, I think. So I guess from a management perspective, in that case, you're like, well, if you're doing it with 6 people, why would I hire a seventh one? You're already taking care of millions of users. The system itself is sort of what's managing it's a self-managing system in a way, right? So I think what justifies more investment would be, if one of your KPI is straight more sales, and you're capping at some point, and it because of a lack of bandwidth, and then there's a clear business case for an extra set of hands, or simply someone with an experience that would unlock more, and it's not something that the community itself would generate by its own self, then there's a case for it. But it's a tough one, right? I don't think there's a definite answer to this one, but it's certainly interesting to think about because we're so busy.
I agree. Fair enough.
Yeah.
Your answer. Fair enough.
It's a bit of a diplomatic, wishy-washy going around your answer, your question.
Fair enough.
That's the best I got.
What sort of feel did you have for being welcome at the C-suite level? Did you have a good open door with one or more people from the executive team? Did you feel like you were part of the executive team, or kind of had to report into them? I'm really curious about how this dynamic plays out with this particular role, and it varies, from what I've seen.
Yeah, so in my case, I guess it's I was lucky enough that I was I was employee number 5. So and again, started off as head of marketing. So I had a great rapport with the managing directors. And I think by appointing me and creating the role itself, I think it showed that they believed in the approach and the benefits of having a community-led strategy. So in that sense, the open door was certainly there, and they were very open. Still, it did feel, and sometimes the business, there's so many things to think about, but it was important to keep being advocating for delivering on our promise to members. Not saying that they weren't community convinced, but sometimes you always have to kind of bring the focus back on what's at stake and what promise you're making to the members. And I think that was my role of just sometimes like just sitting people down and just saying like, okay, like NPS is going down on that area, and like I really need to meet with the ops people about space management. The members are like, so the role didn't lose its need. I think the need was always there, but I think I had like great support from managing director, and it's still the same where I am now. So we're a super small team at Voyagers of 3 people, but it is a community. So by default, I think we're very community driven, and everything is in the interest of members. But it does help, right? Like you're not fighting in such an uphill battle when you feel like you're the head, the manager is already bought in. So you can focus on on the work itself rather than just trying to take your point across.
I love that. I call it the big red hammer effect. You need to keep whacking them over the head with it. Hey, remember why we're doing community in the first place? This is a good reason why.
Yeah, it's kind of like that in the C-suite, right? Like every C-level exec brings the lens, by which they operate on a daily basis. So you got to be mindful of the others. Sometimes it can, in the worst case, become like infighting for resources and so on. But I think in a more positive way, it's just about, again, resurfacing what the strategy is and where we are today, and what the purpose is that you're striving for.
I have a question from a whole human standpoint, because we're whole humans, we're professionals, but we also are walking a journey. And so I'd love to learn a little bit about your journey. I'm a huge fan of LinkedIn. It's my primary social stream. And there's a motivational speaker, Jacob Brown, whose hashtag is failing forward. So I'd love to learn a little bit about failure in your journey and how it's played a role ultimately in your growth and success as a community leader.
Okay, wow.
No pressure. No pressure.
Yeah, how did you fail?
How did failure help you?
I'm a believer in you make your own luck, and I'm a believer also in taking leaps of faith, and at the risk of falling and failing. So when I moved to Germany, again, without any sort of safety net, that was pretty risky, but I did believe in myself and faith. That sounds very esoteric, but like I knew, like, okay, I'm landing there. I'm going to put myself out there. I'm going to go network. I'm going to meet people and make my luck happen. And it happened in less than a month. Okay, I think I got lucky a little bit there, but and somehow throughout my life, this has kept happening. So again, last year I moved from Frankfurt to Hamburg, left my job at Tech Quartier without another job lined up. There was some soul searching, so it didn't happen in the first month, and it was a bit of a roller coaster year. So failure, yeah, I don't know if it was a failure, but it was certainly tough at some moments, especially financially. But again, this sort of it's hard to talk about this without being cliche, but like just self-belief and just sort of keep on grinding and just not aimlessly, but like in a sort of directional way. Then at some point, it's like it's the law of attraction. I think the universe responds in a way. It's call it what you want, but I do think you make your path in some ways like this. And yeah, as a community builder, how it made me a better community builder, I think, yeah, trusting the process, I think, in a way, is something I've taken out of my life so far. I'm 40 now, so I have like a good 15 years of professional experience, and yeah, I'm maybe less unidirectional than some that are much ahead in terms of social status or success. I'm a very much more like lived in India. I went to study in Prague for a degree. As far as I know, I'm not using anymore. But I here I am. I'm a happily employed. And yeah, I feel like again, I think this self-belief is something I've always taken with me, and it's always made it happen in some ways. And I'm not sure how this would translate to community itself, though. Um, Maybe the fact that community is not hyper complex in essence.
Mm.
The essence of community is simply bringing people together in meaningful ways. It's making yourself useful, right? Just bringing value. And at the core, I think this is something that most community builders and managers have. It's just this desire to make sure people are getting the most value out of the experience, and just being helpful, being there, listening, taking back what they listen, acting on it. It's basically the spirit of service is something super key. And yeah, I think that this translates. I trust this process of just making yourself useful, trusting in your abilities to do right by your promises. And yeah, I think that makes for a successful community, no matter what it is.
I appreciate that. And I think you spoke very early on in this interview about curiosity and how much that also plays a role. And I know many people believe failure has this negative connotation, but often the journey in life for me has been understanding the value of learning what no longer or what doesn't serve you. And so part of that discovery phase is failure or mistakes or lessons learned. And so my hope in that question was to just sort of bring to light, because so often ICs and individual employees see their leaders as sometimes infallible,
Yeah.
where they don't make mistakes and they haven't had challenges or failures and therefore can't relate to what their experiences have been. And so that question is to sort of create this human connection around the struggle. The struggle is real and everybody experiences that. So I appreciate you sharing a little bit of the journey and some of those challenges.
Yeah, no, and thanks for bringing it up. I do think everybody has moments of doubts. Like I mentioned, self-belief. I mean, it's not without phases of doubt and not sleeping at night. And there is stress, and I'm not the CEO of a Fortune 500 company, so I can't imagine. Uh, I think you have to, yeah, be wary of mistaking the front that people put off with like,
Yeah.
or this lack of talking about being vulnerable.
Yeah.
And but I do also think that sometimes it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like if we talk about being vulnerable, about the struggles, it has to be in a way that is very self-aware, in that it doesn't become sort of, that's all I talk about. Like it becomes the fine line between victimization or just,
Mm.
you have to keep your agency. And um, you have to always look up in a way, right? Because sometimes it becomes, again, maybe you become negative if you just focus on, oh, I failed and I'll fail again probably. And I think self-doubt has
Mhm.
this way of creeping up. So yeah,
Yeah,
but thanks for bringing it up. And yeah, I hope my answer was
you
of
did.
any value.
Well, the journey is not perfect, but purposeful. I say that a lot. It's not a
Yeah, I love that.
linear experience. It is this ebbs and flows, ups and downs, but that is what makes the journey exciting and beautiful and not boring. And so I think, like you said, if you put a positive or a mindful lens on in this journey, to where every experience is an opportunity to take something and put it in your toolkit to be used later, however it serves you, then there's less of that negativity and ultimately that self-fulfilling prophecy that you spoke about.
Yeah, no, you're right. But just to close on what you said, Jay, I think it's so key. Like there's data and your stimuli everywhere, right? So I think the lens you put on like will determine what you pick up on, and if you choose to decide to look at the negative, you'll pick more of that up. But if you stay positive, you pick more of that up. So I think yeah, that's what I'm trying. Just staying positive, which is again a cliche, but like staying positive and looking forward, failing forward is definitely a saying that resonates with my approach.
Appreciate that.
Well, Hugo, I know we're kind of running to the end of our conversation here. There was one thing that I really wanted to close out with, which is what is your view of the future of this level of leadership role? Because it's not in every organization. It is something like, as in your case, you kind of built the role and moved into it. Do you feel like it's something that's going to increase in popularity in organizations going forward? Is it going to be more of a fractional role going forward? I'm really curious about your point of view around that.
I think what's sure is that community will remain a strategy for sure, like a playbook. I think that people can run. As far as the broader appeal for industry and how this become entrenched in the business world, it's still a question mark for me if like chief community officers will become like, will go up on the totem pole of C-level. Like it's not I don't think it's tomorrow that this will be on the level of a CTO, CFO, or COO. I think though, in many ways, and again, very organization dependent, it is on par with maybe in some cases chief diversity officer or chief sustainability officer.
Mm-hmm.
Now the risk here is tokenization, right? Like just saying you hire the chief community officer and then okay, it's taken care of, is the same with diversity or sustainability. I think the work begins when you have someone overseeing that, but then how you walk the talk as a company, right? So I think it's all in the implementation, in the execution. I think Portier, last I heard, there's no more community team. I think it's been merged across other functions. Like, don't quote me on that, but I think. And is it a bad thing, or is it maybe just another experiment to see how it can be implemented cross-functionally somehow? Again, I think it's a running experiment, but I do see again ebbs and flows. It's, let's say, crypto, exploded on the scene in 2021. Now it was dormant, but now it's picking up again. So many things come and go, but community, like it dates back to time immemorial as a concept, right? Like we're human, we're social animals. The very idea of meeting in person to exchange. I mean, connecting that with exactly what we're doing on a daily basis as in the business world. I think it's not going to disappear, but I think it certainly will remain the playbook, and there's so much value that can be generated by, again, connecting people that are fans of your brand or that are connected by your own company. So I think no, I'm again looking more at it from a positive light. I'm a positivist, but otherwise, what's the point of getting up in the morning?
Right on.
Well, Hugo, I want to thank you for your positivity, your perspectives, and your wisdom that you shared today with Jay and me. The time flew by all too quickly.
It's true. You said half an hour is 50 minutes in.
I apologize. I'm a talker.
No.
This was again
an excellent conversation all the way around, and Jay, as always, your questions and insights are wonderful. For those of you who are watching this video, we'd love to hear from you about your perspectives. What is the community leadership role? How does it fit in with leadership teams and C-suites? What has your experience been of what elevates someone above being a more entry-level community professional to moving into more managerial, director relationships, strategic kinds of responsibilities? So if you have those comments, we want to hear from you in the comments. Please, please add them, and we try to respond to every single person out here on the YouTube channel. And in the meantime, Hugo, we'll look forward to following your journey as you do more as a head of partnerships right now with Voyagers. And we wish you all the success in the world, and look forward to chatting with you again soon.
It was a pleasure, Todd. Thank you, Jay, as well. And I love the conversation, and you're doing great work. So keep it up. And thanks for the invite.
Until
Awesome.
next time, take care of yourself so that you can take care of the communities you serve.
Well said.